Today on Locked On Phoenix Suns, Kevin Durant on Twitter calling for random offense, preaching the wonders of random offense. We know Mike Budenholzer loves to play that way. How does a point guard, 2 point guards, fit into all of that? Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we're back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Brendon Kleen, your host and a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 7 seasons. Welcome in. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen to kick off your Wednesday. The end of July is here somehow, some way. The Olympics, the offseason, signings we didn't even know existed or were going to happen. So thank you for being here, keeping track of all of it with Locked On Suns. We're free and available every single day for you, every single place, including YouTube. So just hit follow or subscribe. Get a new episode in your feed every single Monday through Friday. Become an everydayer. Get locked onto the Phoenix Suns all off season long and beyond. We'll get to the history of Mike Budenholzer, the style of Tyus Jones and Monte Morris. But we start in our exploration of random basketball with Kevin Durant and the website X.com, where he took to this week to, again, argue on behalf of the style that he would like to play. I'll tell you what he said and what it means. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down. The sports aren't quite what we want them to be, but this summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with the booster or bonus every day. That's right. There's something for everybody every day, all summer long. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right. Kevin Durant on Twitter, replying to a fan talking about FIBA rules versus NBA rules, said random basketball is what he wants to see, what he thinks wins. He said, you can randomly set a screen, randomly back cut, randomly make a pass to the open man in order to maximize a team. He said it's always about balance. Running a set play every time doesn't work either. It's all about balance. And then somebody said, well, what about X's and O's? What about trying to run things to get players open? And he said, who said X's and O's don't belong in the game? You assumed I'm thinking this because I said play more random. That's y'all problem. You think you're so smart. Okay, whatever. Setting aside the bickering that he cannot help himself with there, the point on the basketball side of things is very interesting to me because it's something that Kevin Durant has talked about for a very long time, and it just so happens to be one of the core philosophies of how new head coach Mike Budenholzer wants to run things, right? So I said all last year that this was the ideal way for the Suns to play. It's not because I was kissing KD's you-know-what. It's because I believed it, and the best results we saw from the 2023-24 Phoenix Suns came when they played that way. If you look back to the win over the Pelicans where Book went off, when you look to the Cavs game toward the very end of the regular season, plenty of examples here where when the Suns really moved the ball, had all three guys playing off of one another in an unpredictable, spontaneous way, really good stuff happened. Okay? And it's probably worth kind of defining what this even means, right? Because again, even Durant, when he said it, had to kind of go back and explain himself a little bit because people assume when you say random, that means that you're just throwing stuff at the wall, taking whatever the first shot you can see develop might be. And I think people associate random with unorganized. I've said this on this show before, but I've believed it even before Durant was on this team, Bud was coaching this team. Random basketball is this term that's become a little bit popular in the league the past few years, and it just has bad PR to me, right? The Celtics under Ime Udoka and Joe Mazzulla kind of played this way. Marcus Smart often talked about that. The Grizzlies under Taylor Jenkins, who was on Bud's staff in Atlanta at one point. He has brought that style to the Grizzlies. Sometimes with guys like Jaren Jackson and others, young players especially, it hasn't always panned out. I think it's bad PR. I think the basic idea of what these coaches and players who want to play this way are getting at, in my opinion, is playing out of ideas, philosophies, and structures more than sets, okay? Because you might be thinking, well, how can somebody like Durant, who is advocating for this style, also be the guy who went to Golden State, arguably because he wanted to play a style of basketball that suited him? Hold on, but aren't the Warriors very, very mapped out and structured? How does that line up? Well, I think those things actually are the same. The Warriors do run a lot of stuff. They have a more maybe complicated action-based offense than other teams. But it's really about enter the ball here, set this screen, and play out of it. Have this player run off of this off-ball action and see what comes open, play from there. Everybody's head on a swivel, everybody screening, everybody cutting, everybody moving, playing unselfishly. That is the same thing that Durant is arguing for, and it's the same thing Bud wants to do. 2014-15, 60-win Hawks team, when all those guys made the All-Star team and they all they won that Player of the Month, ultimately run up against LeBron in the playoffs and get stomped, but nevertheless, that's to me yes, Mike Budenholzer won a championship, but to me that's one of his magnum opus seasons as a head coach, because he took talent that was a bunch of B-plus types of players and made them better than the sum of their parts. Fringe all-stars, fringe all-NBA players, role players who performed a little bit above that, and he made them a 60-win juggernaut team. They were second in the NBA in assists. They had one of the best offenses in the NBA. And let me see, where were they offensively in the NBA? Points per 100 possessions, they were 6th. Given that talent, I still think you got to say that is pretty impressive. We didn't have full-on tracking back then. Well, maybe we did. Here, let me get it. Passes per game. Let me see where we were there. That's passes made total. We don't need that. That's out of whack. Passes made per game, they were 5th. We'll get to more detailed observations. I went back and watched a lot of compilations of highlights and plays from that team, which I hadn't really done because it was so long ago, but I think it's informative. Big picture, though, that's what those teams did. They didn't run a lot of pick and roll like we see across the league now. It was really a translation of what the Spurs were doing with different personnel. But the most important part of it is, yes, all 5 players, Teague, Korver, Carroll, Millsap, Horford, and then, the key bench guys. As I said, B-plus players. No shade on that. They all had long careers and made a lot of money and won a lot of games. But the point was, they all could do a little bit of everything, especially on the offensive end. So you never knew who might score. Everybody was a threat to score. Everybody moved. Everybody had a high IQ and an awareness of their teammates in the court and the defense, and would throw the right pass, create an advantage that the defense wasn't expecting. And you add in the sets and the kind of structures that I'll get to close out the show, and random is exactly what it ended up being. You watch those highlights and you can see patterns, you can see philosophies, but it's never the same thing twice in a row. That's what Durant wants. That's what he had in Golden State. That's what the Suns have the personnel to do now, and a head coach who's going to get them there. The question to me is that I thought that 2 months ago when they hired Bud. But since then, they went out and acquired 2 traditional point guards. How does that fit into everything? Will it change the way that they play that random style of basketball? I'll tell you next. First, today's show brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. We all love sports here on the Locked On Podcast Network. This time of year, though, there's no postseasons of anything. Yes, the Olympics are here, but they'll go by quick, and baseball isn't done. It's a weird time, but FanDuel lets you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everybody, every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. Of course, there's baseball. The D-backs made 3 big trades. FanDuel is an authorized partner, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. But I am going to point you in the direction of USA Basketball. The men are playing South Sudan on Wednesday. They are 29.5-point favorites. Now, I would never advocate to bet against a team you love. However, they just played South Sudan in a very close exhibition game that went down to the final basket. South Sudan also won their opener, 30 points. Just saying, that might be a little bit high. Again, FanDuel.com, make the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, let's keep the show rolling. Random basketball. It feels like there is an embrace of it between the players and the coach this season in a way that even last season there was not. But as much as we saw flashes of it last year, and Durant wanted it even with last year's roster, there's a pretty significant change that this team has undergone in free agency. They signed Monte Morris. They sign Tyus Jones. And now you're looking at a situation where in many games this season, 48 minutes, a full 48 minutes, the Suns will have a traditional point guard on the court. And so you could easily look at that and say, well, not only is a point guard floor general type, it makes it less needed to play that random style of basketball where everybody can handle the ball and everybody's a threat. But it might not even be the best way to play anymore. So where does that leave us with the Suns? I bring some of this up because there's been a lot of chatter since they landed Tyus. I brought it up a couple times since they did that, and I've been talking about it. And this whole thing of Bud got his guy, or Bud, his system is now ready to go, things like that. And this is not shade, but John Voida over at Bright Side of the Sun, who does very good stuff and has a great podcast himself, been on this show, I've been on his, wrote an article today basically making that case where Bud was asked after his introductory press conference in a little scrum among the media afterward, not up on the podium with the mic, but just sort of a quick thing right after, about a point guard. Do you need it? Do you not? He said, I think it could be a solution. I think we need to be comfortable playing with and without one. Now, it sounds like some people glommed onto I think we could look at that part of it, whereas I glommed onto we need to be comfortable with and without part of it. But now, again, they have it. When Bud first became a candidate to take this job, 2.5 months ago, really. I checked back in my tweets. It was May 9th that I put this up. One of the things that appealed to me about him is that traditionally, historically, as when he was a head coach, and frankly, even in San Antonio, he oversaw great offenses that did not have that type of traditional point guard, right? And I thought that would be an advantage for him here because I didn't think they were going to go so far in this direction. Now, I've made the case a bunch already. Getting Tyus Jones is a smart thing to do. The value of even having access to a player that talented for so little money makes it worth it by itself if you have a hole at that position. But obviously, I'm open to the idea that Tyus, when it comes to pace, turnovers, fourth quarter organization, late game execution, a lot of these things that the Suns did not have last year, could make a big impact, be a big positive for this team. So I'm not saying that that's not possible, but to zoom in to the style and the philosophy side of it, Bud's point guards have been guys like, I made a list today on Twitter as this conversation kind of came back up. His point guards over time have been Jeff Teague, Lou Williams, Dennis Schroeder, a guy named Malcolm Delaney, who I don't think any of us remember really. He was a backup for 2-3 years in Atlanta. Eric Bledsoe, Malcolm Brogdon, George Hill, Drew Holiday, and Javon Carter as a head coach. You go further back than that, you got Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, guys like that, who I also would not call traditional point guards by any means. So is that a tension of roster, front office, coaching, player philosophy? Does that signal a breakdown or some not conflict, like these guys are personally angry at each other, but is there a little bit of a disagreement between those two sides of things? I don't think so. I think it is possible. And part of that is because of the other skill set that Tyus and Monte Morris have. Okay? Both of them are very good spot-up shooters and comfortable. They're not these guys that, okay, I'll take one if I have to, like Ricky Rubio. They are real 2-3 attempts per game, spot-up 3-point shooters, which says, one, again, they're comfortable taking it, they can make it, but also that they have experience in situations where they are taking those shots. I pointed out in a previous episode that Tyus Jones, especially come postseason time, played a lot of minutes next to Ja Morant. We think of Tyus as the best backup point guard in the NBA during that time with the Grizzlies. He was also a pretty damn good, closing shooting guard at times next to Ja. When the Suns signed Monte Morris and I was breaking down that acquisition, one of the things that I pointed to is, hey, don't forget, this dude has had a weird couple of years between the Wizards and the Pistons and whatever else, and the Wolves. He also played with Nikola freaking Jokic, as well as Mason Plumlee, who is, by the way, going to be his center in those backup units this season in Phoenix. The way you play, even if technically we call you a point guard and your name's first on the box score, if your teammates with Nikola Jokic playing on the court with him a lot is just so different than what we picture when we say traditional point guard. So we'll get to part of my optimism around this is that the way that Bud has deployed some of these guards that he's gotten to work with, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But it's also that I just can so clearly envision both of the point guards that the Suns have acquired being part of those random types of looks. First of all, one of the best ways to play random is to score a lot in transition. Both guys are going to do that. But even in times when the game slows down and it's more of a half-court environment, enter the ball, make a cut, set a screen, and go spot up. Both guys can do that. Yes, they're small. Who cares? Right? If they're on or off the ball, obviously their assist to turnover ratio and their overall experience and trust from their coaches over all these pit stops and all these years in the NBA from both Morris and Jones shows you that they're going to make the right play, keep the ball moving, find the right teammate, and keep the offense flowing. So yes, these players are point guards, but they're also just smart, versatile, efficient basketball players whose main strengths just so happen to be their passing, and they just so happen to be a little bit smaller. But if you almost stop thinking of them as traditional point guards, which is how I think Bud will kind of think of them, the offense clicking starts to feel a whole lot more obvious. And the worries of, is this going to be a clash of styles, kind of goes away. I do think it'll make sense. I do think it'll work out. And I think everybody can be satisfied with the way they play and how it all looks, even if it's going to be very different than it was last year. Let's go even further back than last year, though, to close the show and go a decade back in time and look at the 2014-15 Hawks, as well as Bud's first years in Milwaukee before he even had Drew Holiday, when Chris Middleton was still developing, before Brook Lopez was fully unleashed, and talk about why the Bucks offense looked so different than the Hawks offense and how they might combine together to give us this Suns unit coming up next. First, today's show brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network. Make sure you're checking out Locked On NBA each and every day throughout the offseason, keeping up with the Olympics, all the big picture stuff in the league, Lowry Markkanen trade, Brandon Ingram trade, what is going on. They have you covered all summer, every day. Alrighty, let's close it out. So, as I mentioned, shout out to Griffin Piper. I think that's his name. Did I just make that up? Half Court Hoops on Twitter, Half Court Hoops on YouTube. Gibson Piper is his name. And he put a 20-minute compilation together. I don't know what inspired it a while back of the half-court motion offensive sets that the 2014-15 Atlanta Hawks ran. Of course, that team was coached by none other than Mike Budenholzer, who now happens to be the coach of the Phoenix Suns. That's why we're here. That's why we're discussing a Hawks team from a decade ago, of course. And I think this year's Suns will look more like that than they will look like the past few years of the Bucks. The number one reason they won't look so much like the Bucks is because Giannis Antetokounmpo is one of the most unstoppable and unique athletic, physical talents that the league has ever seen. When you have that guy on your team, you build an offense, you build your everything around him and what he does best and how he is most comfortable. Atlanta, though, has parts that I think much more closely resemble the Suns' parts. The first thing that jumps off going back and watching how that team played and what it ran is that Kyle Korver was the closest thing to a lead scorer, a bucket getter. We are running plays to free you up to put the ball into the basket guy that team had. And that is probably not how you remember it. It's not how I remembered it. And it's just not how a lot of teams play. Partially because not a lot of teams have an off-ball shooter, off-screen shooter as good as Kyle Korver. And frankly, some teams but it is so easy to imagine Devin Booker, or more especially Bradley Beal, being clicked into a ton of the sets and the schemes that Korver was deployed in by Bud all that time ago. There would be tons of moments in these half-court situations where, yeah, Teague would walk the ball up the court. Maybe he, is kind of yo-yoing it at the top of the key or wherever he's occupying space. Maybe Teague, or, let's say Schroeder or whatever, enters it into one of the bigs, Millsap, Horford, Ontich, whoever it might have been. But the immediate domino effect off of that would be Kyle Korver coming off of a double pin down screen, a misdirection, a up screen, a down screen, a cut. What was going on with Korver off the ball in the half court was the main thing the Bucks were trying to take advantage of. Sorry, the Hawks were trying to take advantage of in those half court situations. As I said, not a lot of teams play that way anymore, partially because it can be, I think teams have gotten a little more comfortable switching off the ball. I think more players are like-sized than before, so it might be tougher to take advantage of some of those matchups. But also, the Suns do have a player, two of them, three of them, just as good as Korver in those spots. Maybe not those off-balance crazy threes, but they're more versatile. Beal, as a cutter, as a finisher, initiating a quick second side pick and roll if that first opening doesn't allow him to score. He can do all of that in a way Korver frankly couldn't. Plus, he does have that off-screen ability as a shooter, like Korver. The same could be said for Booker. The same could be said for Durant. At the same time, all of these guys also have the ability to screen, pass, move in smart ways. They've all played in systems where they've been expected to do that. Of course, we've talked plenty about how Al Horford is a very direct parallel for what Jusuf Nurkic could do. There's some things about the way that Millsap and Horford were used that doesn't map out perfectly here, where, it was more common back then that those guys could pop for a little mid-range jumper. They were better at that than Nurkic, but also that's not the most efficient shot ever. We know Horford can't really shoot threes. Or we know Nurkic can't really shoot threes. He also isn't so much of a threat when you do enter the ball to him at the elbow or in the post to turn that into a scoring opportunity. So maybe not all of this is one-to-one. The strength of this Suns team is going to be its wings rather than its bigs. But when I watch that team play, I can just so easily envision Tyus Jones or Jusuf Nurkic initiating a set, the big three screening for each other, working in 2- and 3-man actions as a unit in, again, a random way where the defense is not sure who's going to pop out for suddenly an open three, who's going to cut to the basket for a dunk, who's going to catch it and reset for a pick and roll or a pick and pop with one of those other teammates. Those basic sets with the bigs and the point guard initiating and the wings like Korver being used as unpredictable off-movement scorers just is exactly how this team can punish opponents. The reason, again, that I don't think it will look as much like the Bucks situation as we might think, or even just compared with that Hawks team, those Hawks teams, plural, is, again, Giannis is a freak. And that just affected everything. It was so much more simple to get a pretty good shot when Giannis, especially younger Giannis, MVP era Giannis, where he was even more unbelievably athletic and forceful and, no injuries, nothing, just playing full force for 48 minutes. So they would run so much where it was just clear out for Giannis in a post-up, have him get a screen from a smaller player. We've talked plenty about how the times when he did have a two-man game going with Middleton or Drew or any two or three of that star trio was playing off of each other is going to be implemented here. But really, a lot of their offense was quick hitting actions early in the clock that would allow Giannis or Middleton to get a bucket one-on-one and or kick out to one of their floor spacers. It was just different because the talent was different. So I know it would be easy to say, well, hold on, Book, KD, Beal, those guys, why not just do quick hitting actions to get them going in isolation opportunities? I mean, we saw that in some ways with the Suns early in last season. I wouldn't say it was the most creative getting Durant open, but that's what they were resorting to. We've seen what that can look like at times when Book or Beal do that. They take a lot of mid-range shots. They force it. They can turn the ball over. This team is going to be better if its pieces fit together better and lift each other up and are better than the sum of their parts. Bud has a track record of doing that in Atlanta. And I think that's what he's going to go back to. Those principles of random basketball, versatile players, and keeping the defense guessing. Yes, a point guard can fit into that. Yes, the big three can fit into that. Yes, the bigs can fit into that. It's just going to be about how it comes together. That'll wrap us up for this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Suns. Hit follow or subscribe if you haven't already. We'll be back on Friday with Stephen Perjone Garner digging into more Suns hoops. The South Sudan game, I'm sure, will come up and more. Hit that button. I'll talk to you then.